For our next segment, we share the story of a family who chose hope over despair.
He only has about 4 weeks left to live.
Yeah.
And that was a week ago. The end of September, he got depressed and there was no hope at this point.
I was done. Done. But now, we're gonna keep going.
This is a video from Marine Corps combat veteran J.J. Hanson's final days. Hanson was also a husband and father of 2 who died last December from an aggressive brain tumor. When he was given a 4-month prognosis to live, Hanson refused physician-assisted suicide and outlived his prognosis by 3 years. Before his death, J.J. Hanson became a face against assisted suicide, and today, his legacy lives on through his family. I sit down with JJ's widow, Kristen Hanson, as she bravely opens up about their family's journey. Kristen Hanson, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
It is our honor to have you, and we're here to speak about your husband, JJ. Tell us about JJ.
JJ was such an incredible person. He was a Marine Corps war veteran. He served in New York under 2 Democratic governors, and he was a volunteer fireman. He was the love of my life and my best friend. He's the father of my 2 sons.
Can you tell us about when he was diagnosed with brain cancer and a little bit about that journey?
So JJ and I, we had just moved down to Florida. He was 33 years old, healthy. We had no idea that anything was wrong. We had just had our son James. He was 1 year old at the time. And JJ went to work like any other normal day. And by the afternoon, I received a phone call saying that he had had a seizure and he was in the hospital and I needed to get there as quickly as I could. It was a shock. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what to expect.
And what was his diagnosis at that time?
So when I got to the hospital, they actually had run some scans. They did a CAT scan, they ran blood work. They thought he was okay. They told me that he would probably go home by the evening. And something just told me that there was something they were missing. And we finally were able to get them to do an MRI, and the MRI revealed that there were 2 lesions on his brain. They ended up doing a biopsy, and the biopsy showed that he had brain cancer. It took 2 more weeks to find out through the pathology that it was glioblastoma multiforme, the most aggressive form of brain cancer that there is.
He was given just a few months to live.
The neurosurgeon who performed the biopsy said that it was inoperable because it was located right on his speech center. So if we were to do surgery, the risk was too great that he would lose all ability to speak and understand language. And so because of that, they said 4 months left to live, if we were lucky, perhaps a year.
And yet he lived 3.5 years beyond that, isn't that right?
It is, yeah. I remember the moment where the doctor told me that because of the cancer it was 4 months, if it had been a less aggressive cancer, brain cancer, maybe 3 years. And I remember in that moment everything stopped, and all I could think of was why? Why just 4 months? I would give anything for 3 years. And thankfully, we didn't listen to that first neurosurgeon, and we went and got second and third opinions and found a neurosurgeon who removed the tumors. JJ did standard and experimental treatment, and he ended up living 3.5 years.
Incredible. And in those 3.5 years, you and JJ decided to be a witness against assisted suicide. Can you tell us about why you two made that decision to fight this battle?
You know, this wasn't an issue that JJ or myself would have been involved in before that. Talking about death is not easy, and most of us, our initial reaction is we don't want to talk about it. And assisted suicide is very sensitive because the way it's portrayed in the media is that this is someone's personal choice. Who are you to question that and try to take that choice away from them? And it's very easy to be fearful of that and not want to talk about it. But going through what we went through, it was about 5 months into JJ's diagnosis. after a short period of a few weeks where he was not doing well, physically, emotionally, the treatments were taking a toll on him. He had become very depressed. We didn't know it at the time. We were there with him, loving him, supporting him, but it wasn't until later he shared that he had some very dark days where he questioned everything. He wondered, is this worth it? If I'm gonna die anyway, why am I fighting? Am I too much of a burden to all of you? He felt like it was a burden for us to care for him, even though we didn't feel that way, of course. And it was after that, shortly after that, when we saw Brittany Maynard on TV. Right. And we saw how assisted suicide was being portrayed. It was this message of hopelessness that no matter what you do, this is the compassionate and dignified way of dying. And if you're a patient like JJ, he had the exact same cancer as Brittany. There was no hope of living. And at that point, JJ was going into remission and he was responding to the treatment. So we were just shocked. We were fearful for all the other patients who would see that, hear that message, and give up hope. And we knew, going through it, that the most important thing a patient or their caregivers could have is hope. Even if it's just hope for that day. You know, hope is so important to all of us.
As a caregiver, as someone who loved and cared for someone who was dying from cancer, can you share with us what those last years meant to you?
Oh my goodness. I am so thankful for each and every day that we had. JJ's motto became "every day is a gift." And that was so true. Each and every day we had together was something I treasure now. We were able to make so many memories with James, our older son. He got to know who his daddy is. We made videos, we took pictures, we spent time together. And that's the most important thing any of us can have, is time. But we were also very fortunate to have our other son, or our younger son, Lucas. He was an unexpected gift in the journey, and James is just such a doting, loving older brother. And every time I look at them together, it gives me hope.
What a gift. And yet we are seeing this propaganda and this messaging that physician-assisted suicide is some form of a medical treatment. Is that dangerous?
Oh my goodness, it's so dangerous. And ultimately that is why we decided to become involved, because JJ, having worked in politics and in state government, he saw that people weren't being made aware of the very real dangers of when assisted suicide becomes public policy. You may, in theory, agree with this idea of personal autonomy and choice, that if this decision truly does not impact others, they should have the right to do that. But he saw that in reality, that's not the case. When you treat a patient with assisted suicide, it becomes medical care and medical treatment, and that impacts all of us. We have a profit-driven healthcare system, and one person's decision does impact us. And what really scares me as a caregiver is that we are seeing in states where this is legal, in California and Oregon specifically, we have some cases where patients who have curable cancer, not even terminal cancer like JJ, their insurance companies are denying them coverage for treatment, which makes them terminal then, and then offering assisted suicide instead.
So what would you say to legislators who might be considering assisted suicide legislation?
I've had the opportunity to speak with legislators, and we speak with legislators who span the political spectrum, and we work with disability rights groups, we work with medical professional societies, and really the top three things that I always try to point out is that, one, doctors make mistakes. Look at JJ, his doctors were so very wrong, and that's not unusual. It's very difficult to prognosticate 6 months or more out how much time you have left to live. Patients outlive their 6 months about 20% of the time. Doctors underestimate how much patients are going to live, how long they're going to live. Second is that JJ, having gone through what he went through, we saw that the safeguards in these laws are inadequate. He experienced a period of depression, but it wasn't at the time when he could have requested the medication. You see, what happens is there are these supposed safeguards in the laws that when a patient requests these lethal medications, their doctor may refer them out for psychological evaluation, but it's not mandatory. And in reality, in Oregon, it happens about 3% of the time. Last year, it was around 3% of patients, very small amount, were ever evaluated for depression. But even if the patient is evaluated and they're not depressed when they receive the medications, no one's required to follow up with you. You go home with that medication, you have it on your nightstand, and no one's there. But then the last thing I mentioned is the health insurance. And most legislators, when I speak to them and our coalition speaks to them, they see the very real danger of this, that, you know, when it comes down to it, will a health insurance company do the right thing or the cheap thing?
Finally, Kristen, my last question to you is, what do you think JJ's message would be if he were here today speaking about assisted suicide?
The reason I'm here today is that even in his final days, JJ was adamantly opposed to assisted suicide. One of the last things he asked of me was that I would continue sharing our story for him to protect the vulnerable people who are put at risk by this legislation. And I think that that's the most important message that he has, is that all we can do is one day at a time. Everyone should always have hope, even if it's just hope for that day. And with assisted suicide, you can't look at the individual. This isn't just one situation. You have to look at how it's going to impact everyone.
Kristen Hanson, thank you for carrying on JJ's legacy and sharing his witness with us today.
Thank you, Catherine.
To find out more about Kristen's work against assisted suicide, you can go to patientsrightsaction.org.